Good evening and welcome to Center for Return / Congregation Aderet El, and we have to thank the rabbi and congregation of Aderet El for the incredible hospitality that they show us. Now, Rabbi Shlush, who's one of the nicest people you will ever meet, and I say that each time, but I mean it each time. He tells me, what do you mean? What are you thanking us? We thank you for running this beautiful program. But we have to understand that he has opened up the shul, he has made it available to his community, and he has shown us incredible, gracious hospitality. So we all owe him a debt of gratitude, to him and the Kehillah. Now, my brother, Rabbi Aharon Kahn, has spoken for us a few times. And there's only one way to describe his lecture, his shiur, is terrific. There's no question about it. He's absolutely terrific. Besides the fact that he's brilliant, he's also an amazing orator and communicator. And a heart as big or bigger than his tremendous intellect. So, that being said, we are going to enjoy a fantastic intellectual adventure over the last hour. And we started a little bit late, and we will finish on time. So my brother told me last time, Avram, if you would have given me another 15 minutes, I could have done something with that. But I want you here next time. You understand? So I need to make it that we should finish on time. And we will be davening, we will be praying the evening service right afterwards. Those who can stay, we would ask you that you should stay. And without further ado, my brother, who is an esteemed Rav in Brooklyn with a beautiful congregation of his own, and also a professor of Talmud at Yeshiva University. Without further ado, Rabbi Aharon Kahn.
Kvod Marad Asra, the rabbi of this very special Kehillah here, who's of course a Talmud of ours as well, a student at our yeshiva. I wholly concur with my brother, Soll sein gesund, that this is a very special place to be. And to stand here in front of you is what we call a zuchus, a merit of no small proportion. You know, my brother started the Center for Return many, many years ago. I don't know how many Jews I have inspired and influenced and made feel good simply that they are Jewish. Made them feel good about their connections to the Jewish people. But I can tell you that he and his Rebbitzin have influenced thousands. And so it's a very humbling experience to hear those accolades, but we have to know the proportions of that also. I'm going to begin with a story. The story takes place in Jerusalem, in Yerushalayim, many years ago, before the state, and it takes place at a time when the community, the Jewish community in Jerusalem, was very poor, desperately poor, to such an extent that actually there were people who died of starvation. We have a little boy who's walking in the street of Jerusalem, and he spies a gold coin on the ground. The only problem is that it's Shabbos. And on Shabbos, coins, you can't pick them up. They are instruments of transaction, they are what we call muktzah, they are forbidden to carry for those people who keep the Shabbos, and therefore he didn't pick it up, because he was a very God-fearing, very religious boy. On the other hand, he doesn't want to leave the coin, because he was also very hungry. And so he hovered over the coin for several hours, counting the time until Shabbos would be over. And just about when that time arrived, a little Arab boy noticed the coin also. Well, he had no problem with Shabbos. So he ran over, grabbed the coin from under his hands, and ran away with the coin. The boy was besides himself to no end. He was totally disconsolate, and every attempt on the part of his parents and his teachers and his friends to try to calm him down, he just couldn't abide the fact that so near and yet so far. And they didn't know what to do with him. A few days went by, and it was simply not something that, they were afraid for his health. He was so distressed. And so they brought him to Reb Shmuel Salant, the great rabbi of Jerusalem, and they figured maybe he'll have something to say. Although, to be very frank with you, until that point, many people told him the reward that you'll get in the world to come for keeping the Shabbos, for keeping the Sabbath, is so much greater than the value of a gold coin. But perhaps to a young child that didn't mean that much. And in any case, all he knew was that he didn't have what to eat. Reb Shmuel Salant began by suggesting to him the same thing, that the rewards in the world to come for having kept the Shabbos with such diligence and at such sacrifice meant much more than the gold coin could mean in this world. And of course, again, to no effect. But then Reb Shmuel Salant went to his drawer and took out a gold coin, exactly the same kind of coin. And he said to the boy, I'll tell you what, if you're willing to sell me your share in the world to come for keeping the Shabbos and not picking up the coin, I will pay you this much. And he handed him the gold coin. He showed him the coin and he said, here it is. Suddenly, the boy started to think. With a huge smile on his face, he says, no, thank you. I'd rather have my share in the world to come. Now, of course, the psychology of this is incredible, because until you put an actual down-to-earth value on something that spiritual and that esoteric and that distant, the world to come, it's a long way off. Even for a person that's 95, sometimes it's a long way off. So, you suddenly make it material. You make it real. So there are rewards for keeping the Sabbath that have to do with the world to come. And I'll tell you another story. There was a family that was traveling from Brooklyn on their way to Muncie. Are we familiar with that? So you go with the Brooklyn Bridge, and then you go with the FDR Drive, and you go over the George Washington Bridge, and finally the Palisades, and slowly but surely you make your way to Muncie. The problem is they left a little bit too late on Friday, and the traffic, as happens often enough in New York, was terrible. And they had just arrived at the Lower East Side, and they realized it's impossible, they will never make it. Well, the Lower East Side has a Jewish community, but they do not have houses, they have apartments, and the apartments are rather small. They didn't know anyone on the Lower East Side. And Kenai Nahara, the car was a minivan, and the minivan was filled with about 7 or 8 people. And what did you do now? So they saw a sign that said the mikveh, and they saw somebody coming out from the mikveh Friday afternoon. So they pulled up the car and they went over to him. They said, do you know any place where we could stay for Shabbos? And they said, they know there's one person, he happens to be the assistant, the one who took care of the physical plant of the yeshiva of the great Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. Yeshiva Teferes Yerushalayim. He was the shamash. And he happens to live over here, 500-something Grand Street. And he has a small apartment, but he has a very big heart, much bigger than mine. And he is surely going to take you in. Tiny apartment, he has his own children, his family, what's going to be? Anyhow, with great hesitation, they knocked on the door, and they told him the predicament. Absolutely. Well, during Shabbos, one of this, Rabbi Schiff, his name was, one of Rabbi Schiff's daughters was just super. She catered to them, and she took care of them, and she served them with such graciousness and such kindness and such generosity that this person decided, I have a nephew, and this would be a great shidduch. So from that Shabbos, that they didn't make it to Muncie, became the shidduch of Rabbi Schiff's daughter with that person's nephew. So that's another kind of reward that Shabbos provides. But I would like to suggest that Shabbos is indeed a very unique mitzvah, a very unique phenomenon, and the phenomenon of Shabbos is that Shabbos, as spiritual as it is, and as much as it connects you to God, and as much as it is the thing that preserved the Jewish people in all the generations, but Shabbos is a day of earthly delight. And the rewards of Shabbos are not merely the world to come. They are not merely the possibility of a shidduch. They are the actual rewards of Shabbos, is the enjoyment of Shabbos. That's a remarkable idea. We have, when a boy is born, so the Shabbos before the bris, there's a celebration. When does the celebration take place? Friday night. What's it called? The Shalom Zachar. A Shalom Zachar, you know what you do at a Shalom Zachar? You eat. Friday night, everybody has a very, very sumptuous meal. And they're absolutely full. And what do? They go to the person's house, or they go to the lunchroom of the shul, or whatever. And what do they do all over again? They eat. And this, well, maybe for Jews that's not such a miraculous thing. But the fact is that it's strange that right after we've eaten our meal, we go and eat again, and that's all you do. You just eat, you wish everybody well, and you go home. So what is this idea? There's nothing happening there. Of course, when Jews get together, they want to be spiritual. They can sing some songs about the Shabbos Zmiros. They can say some words of Torah. But that's not essential. The only thing that people do is they eat, usually arbus and beer, but chickpeas. But it's kind of evolved to become much more plentiful than that, especially here in America. So what's the point? So I had an idea. The soul, the neshama, is in a very good place before the baby's born, and then the neshama enters the body and comes down to earth. And we are made of spirit and the corporeal, physical flesh that we are, the basar Adam, and that combination is the human being. And the neshama wonders, what am I doing here on earth? I was so spiritual, and I was so endowed with the holiness and the sanctity of being near Hashem. What is it that I want to be here on earth for? And I believe that the Shalom Zachar answers that question by teaching the neshama a lesson of what it is that Hashem wants. What does God want? And the neshama is told, what is the holiest day of the entire calendar? Now many will answer Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur? Well, Yom Kippur has tremendous advantages. It's once a year. The rarer that something is, the more you think it's exceptional and special. That's the truth. Shabbos is 52 times a year. But those who know that Shabbos' sanctity is greater than the sanctity of Yom Kippur. Yes. What do we do on Yom Kippur? We fast. On Yom Kippur, we try to be like angels. We try to elevate ourselves and kind of escape our corporeality, escape our physical essence. What we do on Shabbos is the exact opposite. You're not supposed to fast on Shabbos. Shabbos is a mitzvah to enjoy the Shabbos. The mitzvah, the commandment, is to celebrate Shabbos by eating and drinking. And we tell the neshama, God doesn't want you to be angels. He wants you to be human. And in your human manifestation, show that you can elevate yourself and sanctify yourself, and that is Shabbos. Shabbos takes the world and says, and this is a remarkable concept, most people think that Shabbos is antagonistic to the world because you have to pull away, you refrain. But Shabbos is not antagonistic to the world. On the contrary, Shabbos embraces the world in a certain way so that we can go back into the world, into the workday, into the workplace, into the day-to-day, with a completely different perspective on the potential and the capacity of what it is that we can make out of this world. So that all of the things that were otherwise mundane and routine and totally of this world suddenly are endowed through the Shabbos with a spiritual essence, which without the Shabbos could never possibly have happened. So that is what the Shalom Zocher is. We go and we eat and we say to this little soul that was just born, this baby that hasn't been circumcised yet, you know why you're here on this earth? Because in this world you can create unbelievable sanctity, and no angel can match that. So this is the Shabbos' reward. And there is a verse, the prophet Isaiah, the Navi Yeshayahu says, in the name of God, you shall declare Shabbos to be a delight. And the commandment, as it is expressed in all the books of law, in all the legal texts of halacha, they all make the same point that on Shabbos we are obligated to enjoy ourselves. And there are certain rules, certain ways of doing it, yes. But the concept, the principle behind it is to enjoy ourselves. But if you look carefully at that verse, it says you shall call Shabbos a delight. Now that's strange. Why doesn't it say you just enjoy yourself on Shabbos? Have a good time on Shabbos. Eat, drink, be merry, enjoy yourself. What does it mean to call Shabbos a delight? The answer is it's our obligation to take Shabbos and its sanctity and the retreat from the world and the spiritual consequences of that, and make sure that, maybe I would almost use the word in spite of all that spirituality, in spite of going to shul, of going to the synagogue, time's not up, is it? No. I didn't think so. In spite of all of that spirituality, you have to acknowledge and relate to Shabbos the most delightful day of the week. And that's something very, very special about Judaism. Judaism never said that the goal is to have a good time. No. No one ever said that Judaism is have a good time. But it would be a terrible mistake if someone thought that Judaism denies you a good time. You know what Judaism says? Have a better good time. Because a better good time is a time that has associating the good time with value. So if a person has a Shabbos meal, for example, of course the food is spectacular. Of course the table is lily white. Of the tablecloth. Of course it's splendor all around you. There's no question that, in the secular world, I don't even know if a Thanksgiving meal could match it. And that's every Shabbos. You set the table with finery. You take out your silver. You take out your china. Of course, if you have 11 children, maybe paper plates. Okay, but you take out your china, and it's something very, very elegant. And the food is spectacular, and it's a 6-course meal or whatever. But it is endowed with the Kiddush in the wine cup, in the goblet that you make the blessings over, and the way you cut the challah, and the fact that you sing songs that are relating to Shabbos, but also relating you to God. And it just creates a context. You bless everything. You bench afterwards. You thank God for the food that you ate. There are words of Torah being said. There is a spiritual aura to the physical. And that's what Shabbos is. And when you have that aura, the physical suddenly becomes infinitely more valuable and infinitely more important. Because the nature of what we are is that the more animal we are, the less happy we are. That's the truth. In the end, it's always that way. You can get drunk and you can feel very good, very euphoric. But the next morning there's a hangover. And that's the way it is with everything. It doesn't last. There's very little that stays with us. There's very little that has that staying power, because all it is the physical. And by the way, the same is true of human relations, which I'm not going to go into, but it's the same thing. The more it's purely physical, the less important it is, and the less we will endow it with significance, and the more likely it is to crash. It has to be that way. Because the human being was never meant to be completely physical. That's what animals are for. And Shabbos teaches us, if it teaches us anything, that the physical can be, must be, and will be endowed with the spiritual, which redeems the physical without destroying it. And that's an unbelievable gift. And that's why we have to declare Shabbos to be a delight. Because we have to acknowledge that spiritual is not the enemy of physical. That spiritual and physical are not mutually exclusive. That spiritual and physical are able not only to live side by side, but actually to complement one another and perhaps enhance and endow one another. We are not angels, we are human beings, but we're not animals either. And that's what Shabbos did. It gives us that context where we are able to do this in a very special way. Now, something very fascinating about Shabbos. As much as Shabbos relates to me as a person, it is something that connects me to every other Jew. And it's very interesting. In the Ten Commandments, when God speaks to the Jews, he speaks in the singular. You, individual, should remember the Sabbath to keep it holy. But when we speak about the covenant of Sabbath, then we are speaking about the entire people of Israel. Beini uvein bnei Israel, between me and the people of Israel, it is a sign forever that God created the world. And that's a remarkable thing. The fact that the covenant is relating to all the Jews everywhere is a remarkable thing. What it means really is that the covenant of Shabbos binds the people of Israel together. It doesn't just mean that you can have Shabbos here, you can have Shabbos in Sydney, Australia, you can have Shabbos in South Africa, you can have Shabbos in Israel, you can have Shabbos in the North Pole. It means much more than that. And I'll tell you what it means. Imagine the following analogy. A father has two children, two teenage children, 19, 20 years old. One of them is a very capable violinist, and the other one has no connection to music whatsoever. And the father decides he decides to spend a ton of money to buy a really, really special, not a Stradivarius, but something really special, a great violin for that child, who is the violinist. It's unlikely that the other child will get extraordinarily jealous. Why? Listen, I'm not talented, I'm not capable. What would I do with the violin? I wouldn't know what to do with it. So I'll take the case. I mean, what are they going to do with the violin? So there's no jealousy. What happens if a different scenario? Father has two children, and he buys one of the children a very expensive car. So the other one's going to be very jealous. I can drive a car too. Why didn't he do it for me? Now let's ask a question about Shabbos. God says, I give you, the people of Israel, the gift of Shabbos. And it is a gift. It is an unbelievable gift. See, this is not just the thank God it's Friday type of thing, and our week is almost over and we don't have the headaches of the job and the nerves, and we can relax and we can enjoy ourselves. This is much, much more profound. Of course, you have to be in it, and you have to feel it, and you have to know it to realize that. But it's far beyond rest and relaxation. Far beyond. But this kernel idea of Shabbos should have been given to the entire world. You know why? Because it expresses the fact that God created the world, and then he stopped creation. Now the world expands, but it doesn't get recreated every single day in the sense that there's another planet somewhere and suddenly there's another, there's one moon. You don't wake up the next day and there are two moons. That we procreate, but there aren't suddenly people, coming out of nowhere. God created a world, and then the world develops itself, recreates itself, replenishes itself, but there's only one world. And that world was created at a certain time, and we celebrate Shabbos, we acknowledge that. So if that's the case, the whole world should acknowledge that. Every human being should acknowledge God as the creator. So why does Hashem say, I'm going to give Shabbos just to the Jewish people and make out of it a covenant, a relationship, a connection? The answer is because he's that second father. When you love somebody, you may even do something a little irrational. When you really care, and God cares about the Jewish people, he gave them that gift to the exclusion of everybody else. And that's an incredible idea. And because of that, I have an idea about anti-Semitism. I would suggest that 95% of anti-Semitism is rooted in jealousy. There's all kinds of jealousy. But I would say that 95% is rooted in jealousy. You have a people that have been beaten down to such an extent. And they didn't end up in the ghetto of Gaza and feeling sorry for themselves day and night and maintaining their victimization as a badge of honor for generations. Refugees. A Jew is never a refugee for more than one generation. After that, they control all the banks, they own all the newspapers. They tell a story about a fellow that was in the subway, and he sees that his friend, somebody that he knows from the synagogue, he sees him across, and he's reading the Arab papers, English, like Al Jazeera or something like that. He says, what are you reading that for? He says, I'll tell you. I used to read the Jewish papers. What does it say in the Jewish papers? There's a pogrom here, there's a tzara there, there's a swastika here, When I read the Arab papers, the Jews, they run the world. It's a pleasure. But that's jealousy. How does the individual, how does he rise like that? In Korea, they made it their business to study the Talmud. You study the Talmud? In Korea, they study the Talmud. Why are you studying the Talmud? Do you know that they sent a delegation from Korea to a yeshiva in Bnei Brak in Israel? How do you study? They study the Talmud because they want the secret of the Jewish success. How come it is that they're smarter than everybody else? I don't know if they're smarter than anybody else. But they succeed, and they're diligent, and they think, and they always think out of the box. It's an amazing thing. The great thinkers are Jews. And of course, everybody knows that the number of Nobel Prizes are way out of proportion. And that makes a non-Jew say, like, why them? I have an idea that this anti-Semitism that we are seeing a resurgence of is not because it's anti-Israel and it's masking anti-Semitism. It's anti-Israel because Israel is so successful. You see an Iron Dome, and if you're not Jewish, you can get sick from it. You have to have a tremendous generosity of spirit to be willing to acknowledge that Israel, this little tiny country with so few people, has so many startups, so many computer people, so many geeks, so many businessmen, so much success, so many high-rise apartments. Take a desert and turn it into a flourish. Unbelievable. Well, that leads to tremendous jealousy. I want to tell you something very interesting about Shabbos. Why should anybody care if the Jew keeps Shabbos? So in the times of the Greeks and the Romans, I remember when I studied Latin and Greek and all of the related and ancillary studies in my youth, I came across a tremendous amount of anti-Semitism in Greek and Roman literature. And one of the things they descended upon is the Shabbos. What a lazy people. 1/7 of their lives they waste in indolence. It's unbelievable. I brought with me a quote. It says here, the Romans, with their sense of efficiency in industry, obviously had no sympathy for a day every week with no work. Unbelievable. It's like the Jews, Nebuch, were Nebuch, Nebuch were not successful. They didn't do anything. They didn't make up for the lost time. No. They're just good for nothings. They sit there and they do nothing a whole day. Juvenal, that's not juvenile, Juvenal is his name. Juvenal suggests how this uneasy feeling was connected with the phenomenon of proselytism. They were afraid of the Jews. They were afraid that the Jews were making their mark. And as my teacher, Rabbi Soloveitchik, once said, there was a certain time in history when the Arabs might have become Jewish, meaning Muhammad was turning in that direction before he was rejected, and then he turned against them. And there was a certain time that the Romans might have become Jewish. It's amazing. And then, of course, they ended up becoming Christians. But this is the Seneca, the Roman philosopher, at the end of the 1st century BC, is the first to substantiate his criticism of the Sabbath with the denunciation of idleness. Their practice of the Sabbath is inexpedient, because by introducing one day of rest in every 7, they lose in idleness almost a 7th of their life. As I say, Nebuch. This attitude, this understanding of Shabbos is kind of the inverse. It's the upside down of the concept of a day of rest. They hit on something, and they were jealous of it. But they weren't just jealous. It would be a terrible mistake to think that the jealousy was simply, I have to work and you don't have to work. In that jealousy, there was a tremendous perception. Just like in the perception that Jews are smart, or that they're energetic, or that they're able to rise above their circumstance. All of those are perceptions. And they hit the mark. The perception here was that there's something about the Shabbos that keeps the Jew and preserves him, protects him, and in fact gives him the strength. We call it recharging our batteries. It's not exactly correct. I don't think so. I think it's much more than that. I think that the concept of Shabbos, and this is something that I have spent a lot of time thinking about. Shabbos is a day of rest. What does rest mean? What does it mean to be at rest? So most people think that the concept of a day of rest is a day where you refrain from the things that you would normally do that you have no choice but to do. And when you have a day of rest, you have leisure. And leisure means you can do all the things that you don't have to do. And that's pretty much the sense of what Sunday is all about in the secular world. Or Saturday, if you're not working on Saturday and Sunday. You have the weekend, you have the day off, and you can do whatever you want. You go shopping, you go to the beach, you go to a performance in the Metropolitan Opera. Whatever it is, it makes no difference. You binge on some television series that you can get on the internet. It doesn't make a difference what it is. But the idea is I don't do my work, so I have a day of rest. Yiddishkeit has something, the Torah has something very similar to say. It's a remarkable thing. In the Code of Law it says that those who are Torah scholars and spend their entire week studying Torah should rest on Shabbos. Take it easy. Those who work and don't have time to study Torah, let them study Torah on Shabbos. So there is a similar idea, but it's much, much more than that. So towards the end of the Shabbos, we have our Mincha Prayers, the afternoon prayers. And the afternoon prayers speak about all kinds of day of rest. In Hebrew, menuchas ava nedava, menuchas emes ve'amuna, menuchas shalom b'shalva, v'hashkeit v'vetach. Very interesting. I think that this zeroes in on the idea that no individual has the same day of rest as the second individual. Each person has the ability to see Shabbos in the proportions of their own lives. And they don't have to be clones of one another. So there's this kind of rest and that kind of rest. And there's a third kind of rest and a fourth kind of rest. But then after that is expressed in the prayers, there's one phrase, Menucha Shalema, a complete rest, Sha'ata, you God, Rotzaba, that's what you want. Now what does that mean? What does it mean, a complete rest? So I can understand if somebody tells you get a complete rest, it means instead of 15 minutes, 4 hours. Instead of sitting on the couch, get into bed. That's a complete rest. But that's not what it means. Nothing of the sort. A complete rest goes back to what we said at the very beginning. It connects the physical and the spiritual and gives the person that sense of well-being that comes from endowing his physical situation with a spiritual, not component, dimension, so that everything changes. Now, how does that happen? So the answer is, and there's in the works of the Kabbalah, the esoteric part of Judaism, they have a very interesting idea. During the week, when you are praying, it says in the works of Kabbalah, from the Ari HaKadosh, from the Ari's school of thought, that you're supposed to keep your eyes closed. If you can. If you need to look at the siddur, at the prayer book, okay. But if you know it by heart, keep your eyes closed when you pray. Shabbos, keep your eyes open. What's the difference? What kind of idea is there behind this? So I think the answer is very simple, and it just goes to the idea of a day of rest. It goes to the idea of the spiritual and the physical combining and being mutually enhancing in a very special way. It goes to the idea of what the essence of Shabbos really is. During the week, I am the center of my activity. I create. I do. I manufacture. I shape the world. I build. I can build bridges. I can build computer programs. I can build financial spreadsheets. But I am the center of my own creativity. When that happens, the world of God and the world in front of me are two separate things. And when I pray and I have to reach out to God, I cannot afford to see the world, because the world is a barrier between me and God. Then comes Shabbos. And Shabbos says the physical is not a barrier. And the Shabbos says, pull back, refrain. Allow that spiritual side of you to take over. Turn the physical into a spiritual phenomenon. And then the world and God are one. And then you can keep your eyes open. Because what you are looking at is not a contradiction. There isn't that wall, that mechitza between you and the divine. And that is what the non-Jew in the time of the Romans and yesterday, that's what they can't stand. How is it that you can live in this world? You don't have to run away from the world. You don't have to escape it. You don't have to go to a monastery, and you certainly don't have to start beheading people. Because your world, the world that you are in, that good, wonderful world that you enjoy, the physical world with all of its pleasures, you can make that spiritual, endow it with the divine phenomenon, the divine capacity, and you can live the world. And that is something that you can be jealous of. And that's what Shabbos did. That's what Shabbos meant. And that's what Shabbos did to the rest of the week. I think that this idea of Shabbos requires a divine command. You know, it's interesting. Everybody wants to do their own thing. That's human nature. I don't want to be told what to do. A child doesn't want to be told what to do. I remember when we used to put the food down, a certain age, Baruch Hashem, thank God it's not happening when they're 35, 40. But at a certain time when they're infants, you put down the food and they're sitting there in the high chair with a big smile on their face. They take their hand and they push the food right off the tray. You've never seen that? I saw it with my children. I saw it with my grandchildren, and now, thank God, I'm beginning to see it with my great-grandchildren. That is a phenomenon of saying, you are much older than me, you're much more powerful than me, I am imprisoned in this high chair, and a toot to you. That's what it is. And this is the way we are with God, and this is the way we are with everybody. We do not want to be told what to do. That is a human phenomenon. At different stages, we are allowing other people to tell us what to do because we have to negotiate the complexities of life, yes. But given our druthers? No. So when it comes to Shabbos, isn't it reasonable that a person should be able to do whatever he feels like? There's one problem. The spiritual component, if it is going to endow the physical, requires a divine command. Now, it would take me another hour to flesh that concept. It really would. And then, of course, have to worry about, Philadelphia is called the city of brotherly love. I don't say anything about New York, but still we have to keep a good relationship, So, in fact, how much time do I have right now?
You have exactly 20 minutes.
Okay. So 20 minutes would not do it justice, and maybe another time. But let me just touch upon it very briefly. It's not that God is telling me what to do, and by fiat, I have an obligation like all the other obligations of the Torah. And that's part of the burden of being Jewish. There's no such thing. Judaism is never a burden because the fiat is the ennobling and when the Jew chafes at being told what to do, that's because that's being human. That's like the little baby in the high chair. But the food, in fact, is good for the baby. And after a point, they begin to understand that it doesn't always have to taste so good at that moment, so perfect on the level that you are. And that's called growing up. When a person is told by Hashem what to do, there's a certain moment of faith where I say, He knows better than me. And let me take a chance and do it His way. There's something about the way Shabbos is organized, and it's such a complex thing. In the law, in the codes of law, it takes up a huge section with details upon details upon details. But that is its redemptive strength, that you are able on that day of rest, that day of escaping from the world and its mundane realities, that day of connecting, that you are able to listen, to obey. I cannot begin to tell you how redemptive that is. And that is exactly what was meant. There's this menucha, this rest, and that rest. There's this rest, there's that rest. But the common denominator of all those rests has to be something that God wanted. It doesn't mean that God is happy with it or not happy with it. It's that God ordains it. That's the secret. And unfortunately, it's a secret that I guess that has to be understood and felt. But there was a midrash that says this idea so incredibly. And it happens to use two Latin words, which I always like to show off. And therefore, I'm going to say this midrash to you. In the Torah, the very beginning of the book of Genesis, Sefer Bereshis, it says that God blessed the seventh day and He sanctified it. He blessed it and He sanctified it. Now, blessing is endowing it with all good things. That's why we enjoy Shabbos so much. What about sanctifying it? So the Midrash doesn't hesitate for a moment. It says, you sanctify by telling a person, don't do this and don't do that. Pull away from the world the way I am asking you to pull away. That's sanctifying. You sanctify the world and you bless the world. That's a contradiction in terms. Sanctification is pulling away. Blessing is endowment. Blessing is giving. Sanctification, to a great extent, is taking. When you're removed from the world, you're sanctified. There is a place that is holy. There is only one place that is holy. The street is not as holy as the synagogue. And the synagogue is not as holy as the temple. And God's presence is everywhere. But He endows certain places with a greater measure of His presence. And when something is holy, you can't do certain things, which you can do in the street. So what does it mean that God blessed the Sabbath and gave, and then He sanctifies the Sabbath and takes away? And they say in this midrash something very interesting. This is what it says. Amar Rabbi Abba, one of the great scholars, his name was Rabbi Abba. which happens to also be the Hebrew word for father. Basar v'dam, a man of flesh and blood. It means a human being. B'shor shu osa istativa. When he makes a stativa, what is a stativa? Stativa in Latin is the word for encampment, a place of rest. When he gives you a resting place, meaning when he tells you to pause, when he tells you to refrain, when he asks of you, stop, stay put. That's stativa in Latin. Eino nosein, he does not give, donativa. Donativa and stativa is a play on words, in Latin at least. I can't say that you're rolling with laughter or excitement about it, but that is a play on words. Donativa, stativa. What's donativa? Donor, donation. And in fact, stativa also comes from the state, from being in one place. Donativa is a gift. In the plural, it's gifts in the plural. Donativum, the plural is donativa. Donativa, he gives you a gift. What's he talking about? If he gives you a place of rest, he doesn't give you a gift. If he gives you a gift, he doesn't give you a place of rest. But Hashem, God, he does both. He gives you a place of rest, and he gives you a gift. It's exactly what they're trying to say. We would normally expect that this is a contradiction in terms. You bind me, you surround me with laws, you create all kinds of fetters and chains, as it were. You force me to refrain from all kinds of things, including things that I would enjoy, including things that I would like to do. And nevertheless, you're giving me this gift of Shabbos. The answer is, and it's not something you can teach in the abstract. It has to be something that you experience, and not once, but many times over. And suddenly you're in the groove, you're in the zone of what Shabbos is, and you realize that the secret of Shabbos, its essence, is that it's the divine imperative to refrain. And that is the liberating force that turns the world into a spiritual place. And I am allowed to keep my eyes open when I pray. That is an unbelievable thing. A resting place? Don't do this. Don't do that. And the gift. Do it. Take it. Enjoy it. In any other religion, it could never be. In Judaism, it is the sine qua non. And that is really what Shabbos is all about. I have to tell you something. On the Lower East Side, it's a beautiful story. On the Lower East Side, I was a rabbi for 18 years before I moved to Flatbush. In fact, I refused to leave the synagogue until the synagogue more or less petered out. You're the captain of the ship, that sort of thing. But eventually I left. The people that I am with now, by comparison, are great scholars, knowledgeable in Torah, people who keep the commandments, and I try to just keep them a little bit on a higher level, elevate them, inspire them to greater strengths, to greater heights. More Torah, but they are very, very profoundly observant people. And pretty much they could take care of themselves if they had to. On the Lower East Side, they were as knowledgeable as the Flatbush community that I'm with now. That's how little they knew then. I would never use the word ignorant. They were far from ignorant. Lovely, lovely people, wonderful, good, kind-hearted. They really knew what Judaism wants. But in terms of the details, totally at a loss. And many of them were not able to keep the Shabbos holy in the sense that I just described. But they came to synagogue, and they slowly but surely began to get the sense of what I was driving at. And one of them became a full-fledged, what we call a Shomer Shabbos, somebody who keeps the Sabbath 100%. And then came the crisis. You see, in 1996, when this happened, the 6th game of the World Series between the New York Yankees and the Atlanta Braves. And mind you, the Yankees had not won a World Series championship since 1978. There's a lot of lean years. And now comes their chance. This is the sixth game. There's only one problem. The game is on Shabbos. Game's on Shabbos. October 26, 1996. The sixth game turns out to be the final deciding game, and the Yankees won. But this is before the game. This fellow comes over to me and says, Rabbi, I have a very big problem. Now, problems for a rabbi, run the entire gamut. As you know very well, what's for one person a problem is for another person a nothing, but for that person it's a tremendous problem. But it really was. Because here was this question of what Shabbos is was hanging in the balance. Now, he really will be miserable if he doesn't have a chance to watch the game. The truth. Now, those who are not into baseball, I guess it doesn't mean anything. But for those who are, it's kind of, you don't have to say another word. The World Series, the New York Yankees, he's in New York, he's a Yankee fan, 1978 to 1996, all those lean and miserable years. And the Braves were losing in spite of the fact, the previous games, in spite of the fact that every single thing was in the averages was better, except for the final score of the game. So it's just a magical series. And here is this fellow, a world-class fan. He's not going to the game. He comes over to me and says, Rabbi, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to take a timer. Listen to this. I'm going to turn on the TV to the channel and so on and so forth. However he rigged it up. I'm not going to touch any buttons. I'm not turning it on. The game starts at 4 o'clock, whatever it was. I'm going to turn it on before the Shabbos, and I'm going to set it in such a way that it goes on by itself. And all I'm doing is enjoying myself. Rabbi, please. He's begging me. Please. So I tell him, this problem is not a new problem. He understood that. But he didn't expect what I was about to say next. In ancient times, when there was a temple, before it was destroyed by the Romans, there were Kohanim, the priests. And they had this problem. He says, what are you talking about? I said, well, I'll tell you what it is. There were a lot of priests. And there really wasn't all that much to do in the temple, to be honest with you. And so there were sometimes huge chunks of time when they were idle. So one of the priests decided, what am I going to do, twiddle my thumbs? And wait my turn. So he brought with him, from whichever town he came, a little portable television. And he brought it in, and he figured when he's not busy, he's going to watch the program. So this fellow looks at me with his beautiful moony eyes of his, and he says, Rabbi, that's not possible. That's ridiculous. So I said, why? Because there was no such thing as a television in those days? He says, no, it's the temple. That was the most amazing thing. It's the temple. So I said, yeah, it was the temple. But the holy temple in Jerusalem, that is the sanctuary of space. Shabbos is the sanctuary of time. What I was telling him is, if it's the temple, Shabbos is also the temple. You're wondering what happened. I'm not going to tell you right away, because I have another 10 minutes, Ms. Dama. I'm going to tell you something else. We make what we call Kiddush twice on Shabbos. Take a cup, and we make a blessing. Borei Priyagafim. Blessed you, Hashem, who created the vine, who created the grapes, who created the wine that I'm about to drink. And then Friday night, you continue the Kiddush, and you make a blessing which is rather elaborate, and speaks about the sanctity of the Shabbos. And ends with those words, "Blessed are you, Hashem, who has sanctified the Sabbath." Mekadesh HaShabbos. There's another Kiddush. In fact, it's called the Great Kiddush. Great, G-R-E-A-T. The Great Kiddush. You know when you say that Kiddush? Shabbos morning. That's why when they leave the synagogue and they go downstairs or wherever they go, they say, we're going to a Kiddush. That means they're going to make that blessing. What is the Kiddush in the morning? So the answer is, surprisingly, one blessing. Blessed are you, God, who has created the wine. And then you drink the wine. And everybody asks, what kind of Kiddush is that? Doesn't mention Shabbos. Doesn't say one word about sanctification. You just make a blessing. Blessed are you, Hashem, who created the wine. And that's called the Great Kiddush. As the Ramban, Reb Moshe ben Nachman, points out, it is not a euphemism. It's not like calling a blind person sighted or whatever they used to use terms in the ancient times, which is the opposite of what it really is, because it's not a Kiddush at all. No, it means the Great Kiddush. It's the Great Kiddush. What's so great about it? It's a blessing over food. How did that become a Kiddush? The answer is exactly what we said, what we've been saying for the last hour. When you have a sanctuary of time, everything inside of it is holy. And suddenly the mundane becomes spiritual. And suddenly the simple things become special. And suddenly the things that otherwise would be purely physical are endowed with a spirituality which transforms it. And suddenly, whereas at the beginning of Shabbos we have to declare it to be Shabbos because we're just starting out on our journey and we're coming out of the weekday, by the time of the morning of Shabbos we say everything is Shabbos. Everything is Shabbos. You see this cup of wine? This cup of wine is Shabbos. And so, too, I told this fellow, Shabbos is the sanctuary of time. There are no barriers to the world. But the reason there are no barriers is because everything is sacred. Whereas in the secular world, the reason there are no barriers is because everything is profane. And that's what Shabbos does. It takes a world that could otherwise be so terribly profane, and it makes it spiritual and turns the world into a sanctuary of time. This fellow looked at me. I thought it was an hour, but it was just a few seconds. And I'm waiting to see, so what's going to be? And he turns to me, and he sticks out his hand. He wants to shake my hand. And I shake his hand, and he says, Rabbi, you are so right. I'm not going to do it. And that was an unbelievable moment. And all the angels, not that I'm privy to them, there's somebody in Jerusalem maybe that's like that, but it's not me. All the angels, but I guarantee you, all the angels, all of them, the good ones, the bad ones, the indifferent ones, they all came down. And every one of them is smiling. And everybody's wrapping this man around with the sanctity of that Shabbos, when he didn't want to watch how the Yankees licked the Braves and won the World Series. And what he was doing instead was listening to God's commandment and saying, you know, Shabbos. Shabbos. That is what I wanted to share with you. We should only hope, the rabbis tell us, if all the Jews would keep a Shabbos, we would be set free. You know how I understand that? Like, why that mitzvah? Why not something else? The answer is because if all of us keep the Shabbos, we turn the world into that sanctuary. So you might as well have the other sanctuary, which is the Holy Temple. You already have the sanctuary of time. You might as well have the sanctuary of place. And the redemption, which we always pray for, and we always end our shiurim, our drashos, our speeches, we always end with that hope and yearning. When all the world will realize, and there won't be any jealousy anymore, because everybody, every single human being will say, Rabbi, you are so right. And that will be the time that we call the times of the Mashiach, of the Messiah. May he come. B'meheira v'yameinu amen. All right? You know, after this, somebody's going to come out and you'll meet someone, one of your friends in the street, and he's going to ask you, so you spent an hour, what did you learn? And the answer, of course, is that in 1996, the Yankees won the World Series.
I would like to thank my brother, Rabbi Kahn, for fantastic drasha, fantastic words of enlightenment of what Shabbos is, and also how we should keep Shabbos. But I have one other thing. In several weeks from now, the Jewish world, is being called upon to keep a united Shabbos. It's not a gimmick. It's a way of saying, we are the Jewish people. To us was given this special gift of Shabbos. And even those who don't keep the Shabbos every Shabbos, but it's a chance to say, I am a Jew, I am going to be with the Jewish people, a special people that God loves. I am going to be one of those that's going to keep the Shabbos and show that I am united with the entire nation of Israel. We would like to invite those who would not otherwise necessarily keep the Shabbos. We'd like to invite them to the Bayit, which is also our home, my wife and I. We hope to have 50 people there. I know some people from here are already coming. This is a way of telling the Hezbollah, Fatah, the Hamas, the beheaders in Syria and Iraq, Putin, every one of them, we are united. You will never ever be able to destroy us because we are together and we are with our God, who is the God of the whole world. I hope you will join us. Pick up the phone when we call, or you can pick up the phone and call us and say, I am coming. And we have a fantastic program planned. Don't eat too much in the week before that Shabbos. And also we have a beautiful musical program planned for Friday night for the entire community. We'll have several hundred people there with professional chazonim, but also with a choir of 50 or so. So please get in touch, and we hope to see you all. Thank you for coming, and I want to thank my brother again for such a wonderful lecture and shir, and also Rabbi Shlush and the whole community for hosting us. Thank you, and let's have a Ma'ariv.